A Viking chieftain lies dead on his funeral ship, surrounded by weapons and treasure. But the most horrifying offering isn't gold or silver, it's a living slave girl, drugged and dressed in fine clothes. She's led into a tent where the chieftain's men wait. What happens next is one of history's most documented atrocities: ritual abuse followed by strangulation and stabbing, her body placed beside her dead master before the ship burns. This isn't legend. It's eyewitness testimony from 922 CE, and it reveals a side of Viking culture that history books often skip. Think you know the Vikings? Think again. Forget the horned helmets and Hollywood heroes. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about Norse culture. What you're about to discover goes beyond typical Viking raids and battles. These are the ritualistic practices that defined their spiritual beliefs, their social hierarchy, and their understanding of life and death. From warriors who fought in drug-fueled frenzies to execution methods so brutal they seem impossible, from human sacrifices to practices that blur the line between honor and horror, these traditions were integral to Viking life. Some may disturb you, all will fascinate you. Let's uncover the shocking truths behind the most enigmatic customs of the Viking Age. Let's go. The Volga River, 922 CE. Arab diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan stands among a crowd of Rus Vikings, about to witness something that will haunt his writings forever. A Viking chieftain has died, and his funeral preparations are unlike anything the Muslim traveler has seen before. The chieftain's body rests on a magnificent ship pulled ashore, surrounded by his finest weapons, precious treasures, and slaughtered animals. But one offering remains, and she's still alive. A young slave girl has been chosen to accompany her master into the afterlife. She's dressed in fine clothes, adorned with jewelry that contrasts sharply with her status as property. For days, she's been given intoxicating drinks, mead, perhaps mixed with herbs that keep her in a semi-conscious state between acceptance and confusion. Ibn Fadlan watches as she moves through the Viking camp, visiting different tents, saying what might be her final goodbyes. The Vikings believe this is an honor, that she'll serve her chieftain in Valhalla just as she served him in life. But Ibn Fadlan's account reveals something far darker. The girl is led into a tent erected specifically for the funeral ritual. Inside, the chieftain's men wait. What happens next? Ibn Fadlan records with clinical precision despite his obvious horror. Each man ritually abuses her, telling her to inform her dead master that this act is done out of love for him. The psychological manipulation is as brutal as the physical violation. The girl, drugged and surrounded by armed men in a culture where she has no rights or protections, has no real choice despite what the Vikings claim. When she emerges from the tent, her fate is sealed. An elderly woman known as the Angel of Death, a title that reflects her role as ritual executioner, prepares the final stage. The girl is brought to the funeral ship where her dead master lies, surrounded by his worldly possessions. The crowd watches as she's given more intoxicating drinks. Through her drugged haze, she speaks words the Vikings interpret as acceptance of her fate. Then, the Angel of Death moves with practiced efficiency. A rope is placed around the girl's neck. 2 men pull from either side, slowly strangling her. As she struggles for breath, the Angel of Death drives a broad-bladed dagger between her ribs, piercing her heart. Her body is arranged next to the chieftain's, positioned as if she's sleeping beside him. Then, the ship is set ablaze. Flames consume wood, flesh, and fabric, sending thick black smoke into the gray northern sky. The Vikings watch in reverent silence, believing they've properly honored their chief and ensured his comfortable afterlife. Ibn Fadlan watches in horror, documenting every detail for a world that will struggle to believe such practices existed. The historical debate around this practice centers on one question: was she willing? Ibn Fadlan's account describes moments where the girl seems to accept her fate, even appearing cheerful at times during the days-long ritual. But modern scholars recognize the coercion inherent in the situation. She was a slave property without legal personhood or rights. She was drugged, isolated, surrounded by people who could kill her at any moment. What choice did she really have? The honor of accompanying her master to the afterlife wasn't a choice. It was the one narrative available to make sense of her inevitable death. This practice reveals the stark reality of Viking social hierarchy. Thralls, slaves, were the foundation of Viking economy and society, captured during raids or born into servitude. They had no rights, no protection under law, no control over their bodies or futures. In death, as in life, they existed only to serve their masters. The ritual Ibn Fadlan witnessed wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of Viking funerary practices where the powerful took servants, animals, and treasures with them to the grave. While slave sacrifices reveal the Vikings' beliefs about death and the afterlife, their approach to warfare was equally rooted in practices that defy rational explanation, particularly the legendary berserkers, warriors who fought in states of supernatural frenzy. The battlefield erupts, but one sound cuts through everything, an inhuman howling that makes even experienced warriors hesitate. Men charge forward without armor, some wearing only animal skins, moving with jerking, violent motions, more beast than human. They bite their own shields, eyes rolling back, foam gathering at their mouths. These are berserkers, entering the berserker gang, the berserk fury. The term comes from Old Norse bear, and serker, suggesting these warriors wore bear skins or fought with a bear's ferocious strength. Unlike normal warriors relying on training and equipment, berserkers fought in trance-like states that made them seemingly impervious to pain and capable of extraordinary strength. Icelandic sagas describe berserkers working themselves into frenzied states through ritualistic behaviors. They would howl like wolves or bears, bite shield edges with such force they damaged their teeth, and work themselves into uncontrollable rage. Once the berserker gang took hold, they'd charge into enemy ranks with complete disregard for safety, fighting with wild abandon that terrified opponents. Witnesses described berserkers as immune to fire and iron during their frenzy. They could take wounds that would drop normal men and continue fighting as if feeling nothing. They displayed strength beyond normal capabilities, breaking shields with bare hands, bending swords, overwhelming multiple opponents. After battle ended, they'd collapse into exhaustion lasting days, sometimes unable to remember their actions. The source of this supernatural state has been debated for centuries. Some theories suggest berserkers used hallucinogenic mushrooms, particularly Amanita muscaria, which could produce increased strength, reduced pain sensitivity, and hallucinations. Others point to henbane, a plant with psychoactive properties used in Norse rituals. However, no definitive evidence confirms these theories. Alternative explanations focus on psychological techniques. Berserkers may have used self-induced hysteria, working themselves into dissociative states through rhythmic chanting, hyperventilation, and ritualistic behaviors. This could produce many reported effects: increased adrenaline, reduced pain sensitivity, enhanced strength without requiring drugs. But the berserker gang had a dark side. The uncontrollable rage that made berserkers valuable in battle also made them dangerous during peacetime. Stories tell of berserkers turning on their own people when fury overtook them unexpectedly, killing friends and family in fits of violence they couldn't control or remember. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia during the 10th and 11th centuries, berserkers' pagan practices became incompatible with the new religious order. Church authorities condemned them as practitioners of sorcery. By the 12th century, laws specifically outlawed berserkers in several Scandinavian regions. The practice gradually died out, preserved only in sagas and legends. The berserkers' violent rituals marked them as warriors, but all Vikings used their bodies as canvases for equally significant expressions through extensive tattooing. Along the Volga River in 922 CE, Ahmad ibn Fadlan encountered something else that captured his attention: Vikings covered in elaborate tattoos. From fingertips to necks, intricate designs covered their skin dark green patterns, resembling trees with spreading branches, serpents coiling up arms, and symbolic imagery he couldn't fully interpret. In his words, they were the most tattooed people he'd ever seen. Ibn Fadlan's account remains one of the few direct historical descriptions of Viking tattoos. He describes tattoos extending from fingernails to neck, covering visible skin with designs that clearly held meaning. The dark green color suggests ink derived from plant-based dyes mixed with soot or ash. The process would have been excruciating. Without modern machines or anesthetic, Viking tattoo artists would have used needles made from bone or metal, possibly bronze or iron. Each design would be painstakingly hand-poked into skin, dot by dot, line by line. The pain would have been significant, the process taking hours or days for extensive coverage, and infection risk was ever present, without antibiotics or sanitation. The designs Ibn Fadlan describes trees and serpents carry deep significance in Norse mythology. Trees likely represented Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting the 9 realms of Norse cosmology. Having Yggdrasil tattooed might symbolize connection to cosmic order or divine protection. Serpents could represent Jormungandr, the world serpent encircling Midgard, or symbolize transformation and rebirth. Other possible designs might have included ravens sacred to Odin, wolves associated with legendary warriors, or runic symbols carrying magical properties. Vikings believed strongly in symbol power, and carrying them permanently on one's body would maintain constant connection to those powers. A warrior might tattoo protection symbols before battle. A sailor might mark himself with symbols, ensuring safe passage. The archaeological challenge is that tattoos don't preserve well. Unlike Ötzi, the Iceman, whose 5,000-year-old tattoos survive due to unique conditions, Viking bodies haven't provided direct evidence. Skin degrades rapidly after death. What we have are historical accounts like Ibn Fadlan's and artistic depictions showing patterned skin. The symbolic meaning likely varied based on individual choice, social status, and regional traditions. A warrior's tattoos might tell stories of battles and victories. A merchant might display symbols of wealth. Religious devotees might cover themselves in patron god symbols. The extensive coverage Ibn Fadlan describes suggests tattooing was common enough to be a defining characteristic. While tattoos marked living flesh with symbols of belief, some Vikings took ritualistic practices to darker extremes, human sacrifices that formed the cornerstone of their relationship with the gods. Human sacrifices and the blood eagle. Human sacrifice was a cornerstone of Norse religious practice, deeply intertwined with their belief system. Vikings practiced ritual offerings called blot, conducted to honor gods and secure their favor. While most bloats involved animals or valuable objects, multiple sources confirm human sacrifices were performed during significant events or crises. The most detailed account comes from Adam of Bremen, who wrote about the Great Temple at Uppsala in Sweden in the 11th century. According to him, every 9 years, Uppsala held a grand festival where 9 males of every species, including humans, were sacrificed to the gods. Victims were hung in a sacred grove near the temple, their bodies left to decay slowly as offerings. Adam claimed the grove contained so many bodies the stench was overwhelming. The practice reflected Vikings' transactional relationship with gods. They believed the divine realm operated on exchange gods, provided protection, prosperity, and victory in return for proper offerings. Blood was the most powerful offering because it contained life force itself. Human blood, being from the most valuable creatures, represented the ultimate sacrifice, securing the greatest divine favor. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts. At Trelleborg in Denmark, researchers found evidence of mass executions appearing ritualistic rather than punitive. Bodies were arranged in specific patterns, accompanied by objects suggesting ceremonial significance. In Ireland, bog bodies show signs of ritual killing strangled, stabbed, or beaten, then placed in bogs that preserved them. Some bodies show evidence of being well fed and groomed before death, suggesting specially selected sacrificial victims. Victims came from various sources. Slaves were common choices, as they were property without rights. Prisoners of war, particularly high-status captives, might be sacrificed after important victories. In extreme crisis, famine, plague, invasion, Vikings might even sacrifice their own community members, believing gods demanded the most precious offerings during desperate times. But perhaps the most horrific practice was the blood eagle, an execution method so brutal historians still debate whether it was real or legend. The sagas describe it as reserved for the most hated enemies. The victim would be positioned face down, restrained. The executioner would cut open the victim's back, making incisions along either side of the spine, then sever the ribs from vertebrae. Once ribs were detached, they'd be pulled outward and spread, creating a grotesque resemblance to wings. Then the executioner would reach into the chest cavity and pull out the lungs, draping them over the spread ribs. The victim's lungs would look like blood-soaked eagle wings spread across their back. The sagas claim this was done while the victim remained conscious. The most famous alleged victims include King Ella of Northumbria, who supposedly died this way at the hands of Ivar the Boneless in revenge for killing Ragnar Lothbrok. These stories demonstrated consequences of crossing powerful Vikings and reinforced their fearsome reputation. But did it actually happen? Skeptics argue the blood eagle is medically implausible. Trauma and blood loss would kill the victim before completion. They suggest it was literary device, describing ultimate vengeance never meant to be literal. Supporters point to consistency across multiple sagas and Vikings' documented willingness to use brutal execution methods for both practical and symbolic purposes. The truth likely lies between. Even if the full blood eagle was never performed, Vikings certainly practiced brutal executions designed to terrorize and intimidate. They understood fear could conquer territory more effectively than armies. These shocking traditions paint a complex picture of Viking culture that challenges modern sensibilities while revealing the worldview of a people who lived by dramatically different rules. The Vikings were people of stark contrast that defy simple characterization. They were skilled craftsmen who created intricate jewelry and sophisticated ships, yet practiced human sacrifice and ritual torture. They were poets who valued storytelling and preserved history in sagas, yet were raiders who left devastation in their wake. They developed complex legal systems and democratic assemblies, yet maintained rigid hierarchies built on slavery and violence. These shocking traditions, slave girl cremations, berserker frenzies, ritualistic tattoos, human sacrifices, and blood eagle executions weren't aberrations. They were integral to how Vikings understood their world, honored their gods, prepared for afterlife, and maintained social order. Each practice, however disturbing to modern sensibilities, made sense within the Norse cosmological and cultural framework. Understanding these practices requires temporarily setting aside our modern ethical frameworks and trying to see the world as Vikings saw it, a dangerous place where survival required strength, where gods demanded tribute, where honor mattered more than individual life, and where death was not an ending but a transition. This doesn't mean accepting their brutality, but recognizing it as part of a complete cultural system that was internally consistent even as it horrifies us. The Viking Age ended over 1,000 years ago, but its legacy persists. Their exploration reached continents Europeans wouldn't officially discover for centuries. Their trade networks connected disparate cultures, their language influenced English and other European tongues. And their stories continue to fascinate and disturb us, reminding us that human cultures can develop in radically different directions while remaining thoroughly human. The slave girl who died on the funeral pyre, the berserker who charged into battle howling, the craftsman who endured painful tattooing, the victims of sacrifice and execution, all were individuals caught in cultural systems larger than themselves. Understanding their stories doesn't require approving of Viking practices, but it does challenge us to recognize profound differences between cultures and the ways power, belief, and tradition shape human behavior across time and place.